Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Monday, December 8th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Hope you're doing well today. Getting the week off to a great start, right? As always. Hope you had a good weekend. I know I did. A little bit of a surprising college football playoff bracket, but no matter what decision they made, it's going to cause some controversy and I guess discussion. Right. And the last 2 years, it's been interesting because Alabama and Notre Dame, two of the protected brands, so to speak, out there, perception wise, that have gotten left out when they're probably deserving of making it. Alabama last year, Notre Dame this year. Of course, Bama made it this year. And I don't know, man. You look at their resume and they're deserving. They have more big wins than anybody. Really good metrics, all that good stuff. Three losses, right? But eyeball test wise, right now for the last month, I don't think they, I don't think they're doing very well. I think they're kind of in a slump. So that's interesting. But didn't drop at all after getting beat by 3 touchdowns against a team that they've previously owned in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So pretty interesting playoff bracket. But we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. I think Mike's going to be on with Jamie Bradford today on the morning show, but Mike, if it's not Mike, it'll probably be Rob. I saw on social media the Morgues has had some travel issues, stranded at airports and stuff. I can relate to that from the previous week, but we'll see what happens. But I'm sure they'll get into that discussion starting live at 10 on Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show, and then Phil and I will be along with the show. I know that's not what you tuned in to hear about today. I'm getting to that. Women's team won 106-42 over North Carolina Central, pretty easy on Sunday. Men had a pretty easy win Saturday against Stetson, 82-51. Neither one of those teams that played the basketball teams are very good, but a win's a win. And now we have this time, I think, because of exams and stuff, you take this week off in basketball. And this is my whole problem with it. It's December. People are wanting to kind of turn the page, get into basketball, and in the college game, it's just off week off. It's like a football schedule. But you've heard me talk about that before too, and that's not what you tuned in to hear either now, is it? No, no, no. Yes, we're going to talk offensive coordinator, offensive coaching staff right here on Coffee this morning. So over the weekend, Friday afternoon, well, hold on, let me start with this. It is 6:33 a.m. Eastern time when I'm recording this, and I know it's a podcast, so people kind of pick it up throughout the day. So just to make things clear before we get started, it is 6:33 a.m. Monday. So maybe by the time you listen to this, things have changed. But I'm going to try to give you the latest right now and kind of recap the weekend on all this stuff. So on Friday afternoon, news broke that Kendal Briles, the TCU offensive coordinator, most of you have heard his name. I wrote a piece for the Big Spur over the weekend where I just basically said, ever since the Muschamp era, when he was down at Florida Atlantic with Lane Kiffin, I always kind of thought, boy, that would be a heck of a guy for South Carolina to hire, Kendal Briles. I just have always admired the Briles system. I have a mutual friend that knows Kendal from back when he worked at Baylor that spoke very highly of him from a recruiting standpoint. Other people that know him, I don't know him, but other people that know him really speak highly of him as a coach. He's had some jobs. He's been around a little bit, but certainly he's always been a guy. But going back to Muschamp, where I was like, well, that would make sense. Now, when South Carolina hired Dowell Loggins, I think the hope was from a lot of folks because of the connections to Arkansas that Beamer would go hire Briles. I think there was some interest there. At the time, they hired Loggins. Loggins, of course, is at App State. Congrats to them. They snuck into the Birmingham Bowl yesterday after about 7 bowl teams turned them down. So Dowell's going to a bowl first year at App State, going to the Birmingham Bowl. As we know, that can be somewhat of a reward, but somewhat of an unreward at times, depending on the weather. They got a new stadium over there now, but anyway, so you know, there was some talk there that it's kind of behind the scenes. I know there was some interest on his end at least, and then he went off to TCU, and the journey through offensive coordinatorville on both ends sort of happened. So I'm real high on the system. I talked about Kevin Decker, and part of the reason I like Kevin Decker from Old Dominion a whole lot, and kind of talked about him, and he is a guy I would consider to be in the mix until this Briles thing is done. I'm not saying he's the next guy up on the list or anything. Who knows how these things happen in order? That's really, really hard to pin down. But it is because he learned from Heupel, who learned from Lebby. It's kind of the same branch of that tree. I was told it's not an air raid by a certain couple of coaches that I know, but and in Texas, it's a distinction. They'll get on you for not for calling it an air raid, but it's still it's like the air raid, but on top of a run game that's very distinct to the Briles coaching tree. There's a lot of videos on YouTube and stuff where Kendal gives some clinic talks and stuff. You can go learn about that. I talked about it on the special podcast over the weekend, but I've always thought that'd be a good offense. So there's two kind of offenses that I've looked at out there through the years that I think, these days as things continue to evolve, that are still very applicable in the Southeastern Conference when it comes to modern spread type offenses. I think even with the Mike Leach pure spread at Mississippi State, they scored, and there were games. God, I remember them coming back from 3 touchdowns against Auburn, and Auburn just couldn't stop them. So I think it worked, but in the SEC, everything's relative because of the defenses. So in the Big 12, you may average 40 points a game, and it's 28 in the SEC, and that's still pretty damn good. So, I'm not saying that didn't work, or that, whatever anybody chooses to run is definitely, not going to work. But when you talk about some of these types of systems that are, let's say, a bit pass happy, they end up not being able to run the ball. I mentioned Alabama earlier. I don't know if they're running into that or not. I know that DeBoer, that's a passing offense, right, that he runs. So sometimes when you get that much emphasis on the passes, your run game, for whatever reason, doesn't work, and it's costly. But the two systems I like, the Briles system and kind of that branch of the air raid, if it is a branch, and then the Dan Mullen system with the power runs and stuff that he did so well with at Florida and Mississippi State in the league. I mean, it's there aren't very many that you look at and go, wow, that's going to work. So I'm partial to those two. And I've always kind of thought, well, if South Carolina could get somebody that does some similar things to that, then boy, that would be what I would personally like. That doesn't mean it's going to work. It just means that's kind of what I'd like. And so it looks like that's the direction, Beamer's trying to look into right now, or trying to get. And so we reported that on Friday that the Kendal Briles was a candidate, the leading candidate, somebody they're trying to, I guess, close the deal with. So the weekend happens, and then of course everybody's like, "When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen?" Well, one thing I've learned through the years is internet time is different than real life time. When you're on a message board hitting refresh, or checking X, or listening to everything you can, or trying to read everything you can, and anticipating the news, the time seems like it's, 5 minutes can seem like 5 hours. And in reality, you're talking about, trying to hire coaches from across the country. I mean, the school plane has been tracked. That takes time. I mean, it's not a situation where you just snap your fingers and it's done. And if you kind of look at some of the new staffs coming together, and part of this is because a lot of the new coaches around the SEC, not all of them, but a good portion of them, they're all coaching still. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess especially John Summerall, especially. Lane Kiffin's not coaching. Alex Golish isn't coaching right now, but so you look around the league, and it's been kind of slow to come together for a lot of these staffs. Florida Summerall got Brad White in there after Mark Stoops had been fired, and then agreed to terms with Buster Faulkner, but he's off coaching now and stuff. So it's really not fast moving, or as fast moving as we think around college football. And then there's not the pressure to get it in place. There is somewhat of a timeline because players are going to start making decisions as to test the market or stay, and a lot of different things like that. So time is of the essence. It always is in college football. But it's not like it was where you got a signing day coming up and you got to get somebody in place to meet with recruits, or you're able to go out on the road and make an impact and maybe flip a guy that this new person knows. There's no recruit like high school recruiting or even portal recruiting right now, since the portal doesn't open until January. There are guys that are going to announce that they're getting in. There's no I guess, I mean, need to rush it, right? You can kind of take your time strategically, do a press conference. Any contracts over $200,000 at South Carolina, the board of trustees has to approve. But there was some plane tracking. It was very interesting this weekend. So I'll just kind of lay it all out. So on Friday night later, and I had to kind of around, I guess, work around some things on this. I got a call from, somebody that works with me at the Big Spur, and he was like, well, I think Beamer's interviewing someone from Penn State. And so we looked and we're like, well, here are the open positions. And there's a running backs coach up there, Stan Drayton, that's been around, veteran guy. And then he's been at Ohio State, all that good stuff. I think he was a head coach at Temple. And then there's an offensive line coach named Phil Troutwine. Phil Troutwine, from what we can piece together, is a candidate to be, or a name to watch, I'll say, to be the offensive line coach at South Carolina. So you may say, well, what about Randy Clements or Brad Davis from LSU, or these guys with Briles background? Is that a sign he's not coming? Well, I can't tell you that for sure. I don't think so, and I'll get to why here in a second. But when you read into Randy Clements, he had there's some health issues he had. He's an analyst at TCU. It may just be that, hey, I don't really want to move or whatever, get back into full-time coaching. I'm not sure. It may just be that Beamer had already been down the road with some offensive line candidates and wants his own guy. But if it's Phil Troutwine, which, the plane went to State College a couple of times, or one of the two planes went to State College a couple of times, that's interesting. Number one, it makes me feel old because I covered him as a recruit in the 2000s. Whew, he's out of New Jersey. He was a recruit out of New Jersey. Went to Florida. Ron Zook recruited him. Played for Zook for a year, and then Urban Meyer, Steve Adazio took over, and he played a lot for the Gators down there on those national championship teams. He was a hell of a player. Big New Jersey, tough guy, kid. Always liked him as a player, respect him as a player, and obviously part of championship team. If you remember those offensive lines with the Pouncey twins, and I mean, they were pretty salty, right? But that's a player, there's a lot of great players that, let's just say, have not been good coaches. So that doesn't always mean everything. A lot of great players that could be good coaches, a lot of great players that are good coaches, but it doesn't mean you're going to be a great coach. And that's not what, that's not what intrigues me about him. So he's at Davidson. So he's kind of in the area in Charlotte, coached there, and then went to Boston College with Steve Adazio when he got the head coaching job as the O-line coach. And he was there 2018, 2019, and then moved on to Penn State, where he's the offensive line coach. And Penn State's problems this year were really not, in the last 2 years, they really weren't up front on the O-line, from what I can gather. Penn State's always had a pretty good O-line. So this guy's coached like 7, 8 NFL guys, and he's only been coaching for 7, 8 years at Boston College and Penn State, where at the very least, most seasons, Boston College and Penn State are good up front on offense. It's not the Midwest, it's Northeast, but Penn State has to compete in the Big Ten, obviously. And then, the Adazio era at Boston College or any era at Boston College, that's their thing. We're going to build a big offensive line and take advantage of our location and grind you into submission. BC's had a lot of good offensive linemen through the years. And Adazio's kind of an offensive line guy. And I can tell you this, Adazio and Shane Beamer and Frank Beamer, they know each other. They're friends, and all that. So reading the tea leaves, it makes sense just because, you've got some connections there. So the plane went back and forth to State College a couple of times, and that was interesting. And based on what I believe at the time, it could be different. Could not happen. But Phil Troutwine, and I've heard, not confirmed this, but I heard there's some connections to South Carolina through his wife. So I haven't confirmed it. I went on a search to kind of see if I could find a resume or something or from her, but nothing. And I understand that. Just coaches' wives. It's okay that there's not a lot of info about them on the internet. I think if it were me, I wouldn't want that either. Not that that's intentional. I just could not find anything that says, that she's a University of South Carolina grad or whatever. But I did hear that from someone who isn't a crazy glue sniffer that makes up rumors and spouts it off all the time. It was a sane person, so I don't feel bad speculating about that. If I'm wrong, if that's wrong, please, I'm not telling you it's a fact. But I have heard that. And they were at Davidson, so they are familiar. Charlotte's not the same area, but it's the same part of the country. So, and he obviously played at Florida in the warmer weather. So it makes sense if you think about it. But he's a really good offensive line coach, young guy, obviously connections to New Jersey and the Northeast, which is a place Carolina needs to go recruit. He worked at Penn State. Obviously, has a background in the SEC as a player, and sometimes that works really well. A guy that's done it. So if that ends up being the O-line hire, that's really good. I continue to hear Jimmy Smith, for running backs coach. He talked about him, Darlington native, coached at Cedar Grove in Atlanta. Has been a guy that, gosh, he's kind of like Des Kitchings in the sense that, man, when Des Kitchings finally came, and unfortunately he was only there a year, it was like, well, gosh, this guy's been kind of talked about for a long time. Some of those guys never come, like Robbie Caldwell never came. Ended up going to Clemson, winning a national championship. But Des Kitchings was a guy that I always thought, man, they need to get him. Finally, and they hired Everett Sands over Des Kitchings. Spurrier Jr. did back in the day. And I always thought they should have gone and gotten Des. But finally did. Then he went to the Falcons. Now he's at Virginia as the OC. Tough loss for them this weekend to Duke, man. If you want to see a fan base that's been through more than Carolina, look at UVA. Big moments. Gosh. So anyway, that's kind of like Jimmy Smith. People have been talking about him for a while. And it makes sense because, like I said, he's from the state. He's also at TCU right now. I feel like last I heard, I talked to a friend of his over the weekend, and he was just kind of waiting on things to finalize. Said he was very excited. So, until these guys have contracts in hand and sign and it's official, it's still kind of up in the air. But and that is of 6:49 now a.m. on a Monday. So I expect that to happen. Could there be a curveball with Stan Drayton? Maybe. If it were me, as good as Stan Drayton's been through the years, I'd probably go with Jimmy Smith because I think, if you look, Carolina, it wasn't because they struck out on everybody. They didn't really target that many people in Atlanta this past cycle, but South Carolina did fail to sign anyone from the state of Georgia. in this cycle for the first time ever. I don't think that's a coaching thing. I think it's just, they got some guys out of North Carolina, got Gray out of Virginia, smaller class. The handful of players they targeted in Georgia went elsewhere. So it's more of a numbers thing than anything. But usually, you got three, four, five, six guys from Georgia in a class. So I'm not saying that they need a boost in recruiting there by any stretch. I'm just saying the more people you know, the more access to talent you have, the more you can identify players early, the more you can get on them early. So, what does that matter these days? Because Carson Baker was a guy they definitely identified early, number one player on their board. He goes to Florida. He becomes available late, comes to Carolina, leaves campus Saturday looking like he's going to sign. And then lo and behold, the bag gets dropped and that's it. So sometimes it doesn't matter what your relationships are. But I like the fact that he's well known and respected over there. And that he's from Darlington, man. It's good. Good to have natives on your staff because they know the state. You know that down in the PD there's good players. You know that to go by this school. Hopefully somebody they'll go by Gaffney more and stuff like that. Not that there's some issue with them going by Gaffney, but a lot of times Gaffney will have some players and nobody knows about it or nobody acts on it. That's a good place to go recruiting. And the more coaches that know that, I think the better. And most of them do. Like I said, it's not a criticism of anyone on the current staff. It's just the more the merrier, right? So, excited about Jimmy Smith if it happens coming back. I think that if he's the third running backs coach Beamer's hired, on paper, he's the best one by a mile as far as experience and now Blackwell had some experience, but as far as a fit, I guess, what you need at that position, all that good stuff. And of course, he was at Arkansas too with Kendal, Briles, Dowell Loggins, knows Justin Stepp, Taylor Edwards, Rocket Sanders, Trey Knox. I mean, there's literally a list of people Beamer can contact or probably has contacted that used to be at South Carolina that also know these folks. So that's good. I think that would be a really good hire. And of course, there's Briles and the plane. Now the plane was in Fort Worth as well yesterday. From what I'm told, I didn't have total confirmation on that, but the plane landed at an airport near Kylene, Texas. It's kind of above Austin toward Waco, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Kendal Briles coaches at TCU. What are they doing down there? So I had to go do some internet sleuth work, right? And Art Briles, Kendall's dad, in 2022, bought a mansion. Called it a mansion. Bought a big house on this place called Horseshoe Bay. It's on Lake Lyndon B. Johnson, and paid millions of dollars. Bought it from the former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Wow. Football coach Art Briles has enough to buy Rex Tillerson's crib. Oh, gosh, I should have been a football coach. Anyway, or Secretary of State, right? But anyway, so he closed on that in 2022. It was in the paper out there. And if you look at where the airplane landed and you look where Horseshoe Bay is, logic would dictate, without digging in and seeing what private airstrips that they could get a plane into. I think that was the jet, actually. They have a jet and a turboprop, Carolina does. Without digging in to look and see, like, okay, if you come from Horseshoe Bay, how many airstrips do you drive past? I mean, it's right there. So, logic would dictate possibly that was it. Maybe not. Maybe there's a coach from Baylor they were picking up. I don't know. I just don't know, but that was very interesting in the world of plane tracking. And what you also don't know is it dropping off? Is it picking up? Is there maybe something unrelated? I don't know, but it's just kind of funny that we're sitting there talking about these coaches and the school planes go to the exact locations that they're at. And when Beamer hired Dowell Loggins, there was definitely the school plane buzzed out to Arkansas. and buzzed back. And then he came back and hired Dowell Loggins. So it, yeah, that happened last time. So that was that's something that you should always pay attention to. And it's funny because when he went out there on the plane, you tracked it in 2022. A lot of people thought it was Briles, not Briles, Loggins. I knew it was Loggins. I was like, well, and look, I wasn't, like I said, I was told a while back to watch out for Dowell Loggins if something happened with Satterfield. Um, I should have known better than to maybe get people. I should have just said, "Hey, look, I think this is going to be the guy." But Dowell was very, very difficult to explain. Um, and look, Shane Beamer doesn't have to hire anybody. I have to. It's easy for me to explain, right? Because by God, I'm going to try to explain it. There's some guys out there this time around, I'm not going to even try to explain. If it ended up being them, I'm just not going to try to explain it. I'm just going to be like, well, I'd have probably hired somebody else. I wish them the best and talk about players all off season. But I got to do I mean, I got a job to do. I'm not going to whine about it, and I'm not going to not do it. But that was hard. That was hard to explain, after all they've been through with Sat and all the NFL and all this stuff. But it turned out Dowell actually was pretty good college coordinator. I mean, pretty uh, average type guy. System was not hard to learn. Um, you know, so I no problems with what he did at Carolina. Heck, Carolina ended up having their best year under Beamer. Certainly 2024 was better than this past year. Unfortunately, it led to Mike Shula, which was different than everybody anticipated and just not the right move, right? But this is totally different. This is a 180. If it's Kendal Briles or it's Kevin Decker or any of the names you've heard, it's completely different. And I mentioned this before. It's a system like this aligns with everything else around here. The offensive system and game plan under the others with the quote unquote pro style stuff. It's not only doesn't work consistently, and in this past year's case, didn't work at all. Um, it's not similar to what they do on special teams and defense. Now, in fairness, where Shane Beamer's dad coached, Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech, they didn't have some. I mean, their defensive system was under Bud Foster was certainly unique, and you know all about the special teams there. The offense was just kind of multiple, and depending on who their players were, they emphasized certain things. I always had a good offensive line around the ball, but could also throw it. It was the system itself wasn't anything to write home about. It was just a normal college offense, and it evolved through the years. Now, when Ricky Bustle was there early on and they got it going, he was cutting edge. He was cutting edge. And then you had Michael Vick and all those guys. So, I mean, that helps. But, so in fairness, that's kind of how his dad's program was set up in a way. But I think, when you look at Briles and, like a guy like Decker, just in case this Briles thing falls through for whatever reason, which would be disappointing for many of you. I know. Um, if it's not one of those two, very curious to see how it unfolds. But and I'm not trying to alarm anybody. I feel like that's why I keep telling the time. It is now 7 a.m. Eastern time. So that's why I'm trying to kind of, say the time and stuff because there's a possibility this news breaks by the time you guys even listen to this. But, so I do think it aligns with everything else. And I think in college football, I keep getting back to, it's probably because we've been talking TCU a lot lately. Gosh, was it 15? It was first year of the playoff, maybe 14. 14's first year of the playoff. So Gary Patterson at TCU went 4-8 in 13. And that was not good. I think Justin Fuente had left as the OC and gone to Memphis already, or he did leave, and then they tried to run the same thing and it didn't work. Well, they were 4-8 in the Big 12. Well, the next year, he ran it wide open. Got Doug Meacham and I think Sonny Cumby in there. Spread it out like most Texas schools do, and they went 11-1. So and scored a bunch of points. So you've seen it before. I mean, Clemson. You can look back. 2010, they had Napier. Obviously, we've seen Napier's offense now at a high level, and that's hopefully works at James Madison moving forward because he's the head coach there now. But you know, I it, I don't know. Do you guys think that's a great system for Florida to be running and optimizing their talent? Didn't it Clemson after a while? It was better than Rob Spence, but that's about it. Well, then they bring in Chad Morris and get Sammy Watkins, and all of a sudden they're going up and down the field and won the ACC. So there's another example. So sometimes this can really help you. Now, sometimes it doesn't. Let me just be honest with you here. Sometimes it doesn't. And Mac Brown did that at Texas, and all of a sudden they were going to be like everybody else in the state of Texas and going down the field. They scored more points. They got into more shootouts, but it didn't work. And you go back on the other end of it, Oklahoma. They got sick of Josh Heupel. And this is before Josh Heupel evolved. And so he goes to, I think he went to Utah State a year and then to Missouri. And we saw his offense at Missouri. It was kind of the same as it was at Oklahoma. It wasn't the same as Tennessee and what he ended up doing there. And they brought in Lincoln Riley, and okay, so then they started scoring points again. So you've seen this happen from time to time, going in a lot different direction. And here's the thing about it. Sometimes when you decide to go in a different direction, scheme wise, it takes a little time. If you're like a Georgia Tech that's run the option for 10 years and all of a sudden you're trying to go more multiple, Jeff Collins, yeah, they certainly weren't what I would call good on offense because they didn't recruit for it. They weren't set up for it. You look at some running teams of the past, and when they try to go spread it out and throw it all over the place, it just always doesn't always click like you think it would. South Carolina, they haven't recruited to a pro style system. They've just recruited players. I think it's smart. And I don't think because pro style is such a vast word, or broad term, not vast word. What is a vast word, JC? Good God, wake up. Having trouble getting going on a Monday, folks. Did not go to the Bears watch party last night, although it was a great game. I ended up having some stuff to do with this stuff, tracking this stuff. It's like, there's no time for fun right now, Tough loss by them. Speaking of good play calling, hey, that Ben Johnson's really got it going, but Packers own them. But anyway, by the way, didn't want to mention while I'm thinking about it, shout out to JJ Enigbare and Keyshawn Nixon, two former Gamecocks, made the two saving winning plays for the Packers defense last night. So always thought those guys were really good. Carolina actually beat Georgia on Enigbare. They asked Kirby Smart which guy he wished he'd had. He said JJ. And then Keyshawn Nixon, of course, was like Snoop Dogg's nephew, came in from junior college. First year at 17 didn't make an impact. 18, he started most games and got hurt, and and was over at corner and shut down his side of the field, but you never saw him make a pick or anything. But those two guys are balling. So hats off to both of those kids, or players, young men, grown men. They're in the NFL now, JC. So anyway, that's just a little aside there. But yeah, I can't get going. But pro style is such a broad term that, you just, recruit who you could recruit. Yeah, we need some tight ends that can do different things. What's beautiful about this system, the Briles system, so to speak, and that could be applicable to a number of candidates, including Kendal Briles, is that you can also kind of recruit any style of player, and it works. And so Carolina's personnel is, I think, set up, and it kind of gets back to receiver. If you don't have good receivers, or you got, you're Satterfield talked about running the Rams out, the Sean McVay offense. Well, in that offense, they don't even sign any receivers that can't block, because receiver blocking is like the key to everything in it. You try to do something like that, maybe you got some bigger receivers that aren't dynamic playmakers or fast or anything. But you think about the receivers and all that, and it's like, man, that fits. And of course, it fits for Lenore Sellers as quarterback and all the other quarterbacks. So sometimes when you do a 180 like this, it's dramatically different, and your roster is not really equipped to do it. Now, I don't believe that to be the case at South Carolina. I think that they are set up for that. The only spot I don't know, offensive line. I'm like, well, because Carolina's offensive line got kind of big. We talked all summer about it. I don't know that the girth helped. You guys think that? You guys think that girth helped this year? No, it didn't. So I don't know. The guys look slow. A lot of that's maybe because of thinking too much. But unlike some other kind of spread systems, though, this one, it does require you. It's physical up front on the O-line. You got to have 5 badasses up front on the O-line to really make it sing. They're not the most talented guys in the world. And it's a lot of high school principles with the blocking scheme, a lot of man, quote unquote, gap blocking schemes, less zone. But it's, you just got to be physical. So we'll see what happens. So that room needs to be retooled anyway. I think they got the backs, receivers, tight end. I'll say this. I was watching some of the film the other day, and Brady Hunt's just got to get better at blocking. Does Brady Hunt have eligibility? I think he does, if he is back. And I can't reach my roster to double check that. He needs to that has to change. The tight ends have to block better, no matter what system they run. If in the system they're required to block, let's just make it that way. But anyway, I think this is a chance for a new direction, and I've seen it work out everywhere. Kendal Briles has been. The offense has instantly gotten better. That's the same thing with Jason Beck from Utah, who we talked about last week. They're kind of turnaround artists, and had Carolina had even a decent to below average offense this past year, they probably would have, been in a bowl. So hopefully that still means something by the time Carolina is in position to be bowl eligible again. After yesterday. All right, folks, be sure to check the morning show. The show. Yeah, what else is today? The morning show, the show, Sports Talk Tonight on the Chief Sports app. We had an epic SEC Sunday night last night with Rob and Craig. That's up on the YouTube channel if you want to check that out. They're talking all playoffs and all this other stuff. And then it'll be up on podcast. Please go hit subscribe on Apple or Spotify for SEC Sunday night. Also, Four Quarter Friday, our high school sports show. We got some exciting things coming up for that if you love high school sports in the state. Shout out to Julian Walker and Jazavian Currents, 2 Gamecocks that are state champions. South Point wins. Dutch Fork wins. Julian had a scoop and score. Multiple sacks in the game. Looked dominant as they beat Somerville 40-20. And congrats to all the teams that made it and lost. I did want to give a special shout out to Coach Crosby over at Bamberg Earhart. He's a great dude. Hadn't talked to him in years, but man, when they had AJ and they had Daquan, and anytime I ever needed anything from Coach Crosby, that's Casey Crosby's dad. He was first class. He's a first class man, first class human being, and certainly was elated to see Bamberg get over the hump and win the state championship this past weekend. Bamberg Earhart Red Raiders. So there you go. But Four Quarter Friday, I'll have that covered for you all week long. Please subscribe to their podcast and also the Late Night Gamecock Show podcast channel, and rate it 5 stars on Apple. You know the drill. Please do that. I hate the like, subscribe, and share thing has kind of, everybody's kind of hating on it now. So I need to find something else to say. Mash that subscribe button. Woo. And I don't know, something like that. All right, this has been Coffee with JC Shurburtt on a miserable Monday, I guess, because I need to wake up. I'm going to smack myself in the face. But we'll see you on the show, folks. And also with any major breaking news moving forward as the Gamecocks close in on an offensive coordinator hire. Holla.
JC and Mad Dog Bully on the game.